Good evening, folks. Welcome to the Reasoned podcast. Sorry we are slightly late, but hopefully you're all looking forward to a good podcast this evening. You may have noticed Darren is not with us. He is at the exciting ARC conference. And he will be joining us a little bit later on, tuning in to give us a little bit of an update of what is going on there. But you've got me, Chloe, who I'm sure you're very familiar with at this point, hosting. We have got Alex Armstrong, we've got Elliot Curry, who you will have seen, and we have got Charlie Rowley joining us, who is an ex-Tory advisor. He used to be the advisor to Michael Gove. You might notice that he sounds a little bit like Michael Gove when he speaks. He's picked up his accent. We have got lots going on in the world, as usual, this week. So let's start off talking about this spat that has gone on as a consequence of M&S advertising on GB News. Those who are familiar with GB News, which I'm sure all our viewers are, will know that the advertising boycott has been an absolute nightmare for the channel, and the reality is TV stations need advertising to survive. But every time somebody tries to advertise on GB News, the leftists go insane and do everything in their power to make sure that they pull their advertising. And the latest row is with M&S. So we've got a tweet here from Michelle Dewberry, who shared the Stop Funding Hate post that's been going around. So Stop Funding Hate, they've put up this tweet saying, many Marks and Spencer customers will be disappointed to learn they've been advertising on GB News Radio. You can take action by leaving a friendly comment on their Facebook page, encouraging them to hashtag Stop Funding Hate. And Michelle Dewberry, she says, who's of course one of the GB News presenters, for those who don't know, she says, someone just sent me this. It's a perfect example of what I just referred to in my earlier tweet. Hate-filled activists are now bombarding Marks and Spencer's Facebook page, trying to bully them into removing advertising. Why? Because these hate-filled activists believe theirs is the only view permitted to be heard. And you'll see here that this is Headliners, and those who are familiar with GB News will know Headliners is essentially a comedy show, and they've put this clip together, which they've clipped very carefully to make the channel look evil. Let's have a little look at this.
They're evil. Women are horrible. Women shouldn't work. Women are incredibly jealous.
They didn't want to say what caused it. Caused it? There was a woman on board.
Middle-class women of a certain age.
You're not allowed to slap your secretary on the bum anymore.
This whole thing is by some woman.
Those women are hot, and they're flexible.
They let women teach, and they hate kids. It's a female feminist woman's party. So of course they're going to lie. They're evil. Women are...
So there we go. That's the clip that they've decided to use to try to make GB News like some horrible, misogynist, woman-hating channel. And of course, they've picked all of those clips out of a comedy show. Those comments being made about women are simply jokes being made by a comedian. But the reality is that the people who are not regular GB News viewers who see this post, after seeing that clipped up like that, are going to be likely to think that is a genuine, serious opinion that's been aired on the channel. And I just think that these people, they are not pro-freedom. They might act like they're pro-freedom, but they want censorship. They think that words are evil and that anyone that's got an opinion different to theirs doesn't deserve to have their opinion aired. I mean, it's just bonkers. I mean, Alex, what do you think about this? Do you think that they'll be successful in their campaign to get M&S to pull their advertising? Do you think they'll cave in?
It has worked before, sadly. I mean, obviously, I do not want that to be the case. I think it's great to see more advertisers on GB News. In fact, GB News is doing very well with advertisers at the moment. The channel has gone from strength to strength in that respect.
It is getting better, the advertising situation, slowly but surely.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot more people coming on board. In fact, I was after hosting a show a couple of weeks ago. I spoke to a couple of advertisers who were walking through the studio. It was great. They were lovely people, great couple actually, who owned a business in the UK. They wanted to advertise on GB News. Fantastic, fantastic, right? But the problem is, these businesses, and we saw this with the Gaza boycotts as well, they face this sustained, lengthy attack, not just on their business, but sometimes aimed at their staff as well. It's really quite horrendous what some people have gone through, even working for these companies, calling them genocidal people, supporting Zionism and all this stuff for the Gaza group. And again, you get this with GB News boycotts as well. You're funding hatred, you're funding racism, xenophobia. Well, actually, what GB News does is it tells the truth. There's nothing we're allowed to put on air that isn't true. It's all fact checked. It all goes through legal scrutiny, and it all goes through editorial scrutiny. It's not just that I can go up there and say whatever I like. There is scrutiny involved to make sure that I'm telling the truth if I'm saying something on air. And that goes for every presenter who ever hosts a show. That's the facts. Now, what you saw in that video clip there is propaganda. It's propaganda. We saw actually Josh Howie had a similar attack on him just a week ago, where he was talking about paedophiles in the Church of England, and it was clipped up as he added this. He made this statement, which, if you take it out of context, does sound like he's calling gay people, LGBT plus, Q plus, whatever the fuck it is. Excuse my language. It's calling those people paedophiles, which he's not, which he wasn't doing. And of course, because the clip is edited and people don't go to watch the full context clip, they believe what they see. That's a problem we've got in our society.
Yeah, so you may have seen here, just having a look at their website, Stop Funding Hate. So they've got this article, who's still advertising on GB News? Of course, they've got that, evil, racist, fascist at the top of the article, Nigel Farage, to rile up the leftists. And they claim here GB News has reportedly now lost over 100 million quid as major brands continue to steer clear. And they've done an expose of all the people who have the, audacity to advertise on a channel that doesn't follow the same narrative as the BBC, calling them out. They're launching they've got a crowdfunder as well. They've also mentioned here what you can do to take action, and they've said that you can let them know about the growing controversies surrounding anti-LGBTQ and anti-Muslim content on GB News. I'm sure you all will have seen that big report from the Muslim Council for Britain, clearly trying to shut down GB News, suggesting that it is a channel filled with anti-Muslim hatred. I mean, Charlie, would you say that GB News goes too hard on Islam? Do you think that they're sometimes inappropriate in how much they speak about Islam, or do you think that the criticisms that of the religion and cultural differences that they air on there, you think that that's valid and a good conversation to be had?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that there's something quite comical about calling out GB News or suggesting that it's losing advertising revenue and then having to set up a GoFundMe for their own campaign.
I did think that was quite ironic.
Good point.
There's something doesn't quite add up, and just as you say, look, clipping things up from what is a comedy channel when there is context clearly taken out of context, I'm sure there are lots of other people that shop at Marks and Spencer's other than women. So it's, again, I'm sure that might, if there's some market research out there, that might be the biggest demographic. But the idea that they're specifically targeting women means that this is a completely vindictive and totally unjustified and a campaign just built on hate, really.
Yes.
Taking these clips out of context and targeting a particular demographic and making what I assume their view would be women of a certain age that might shop at Marks and Spencer's, who should be terrified about, and feel terrible about themselves if they dare tune into GB News. How dare they? I think it's ridiculous. But look, it's what is attractive. And by the way, no one asks you to shop at Marks and Spencer's. No one asks you to watch GB News. people can watch it. If they don't like it, they can change the channel. They can come back at another time for another program. If they don't like what they see in Marks and Spencer's, they can go elsewhere. It's called freedom, and it's something that we all cherish. I know, particularly here and on this show, which leads me on to your the answer about just free speech in general. There will always be people with views, some quite far out there, but that, the first thing I'll say is I remember being back at school, which was a long time ago. And I always remember one of the best things that a great teacher ever told me was that if you're thinking something, then or want to ask a question, you must ask it, because there is no doubt that there is someone else out there in the room that wants to ask the same question, or is feeling the same thing, or is thinking the same thing. So just put your hand up and ask that question. And there'll be people out there right across the country that are feeling a particular way, that have a particular strength of feeling about something. They might be totally nonplussed about something else. But I think, language is important, and we've got to get it right. But, there will be people out there that might not be, media trained, like, great TV presenters up and down the country. They might have a particular view. They just want to express that view, and it will be a view that many, many people hold in their head and their hearts. And for too long, that debate has been shut down because it's been too pernickety about the type of language. And if you dare say that, if you even dare talk about immigration, you're branded a racist. Well, no, we've seen far too many stories about grooming gangs. We've seen far too many stories about the lack of community cohesion. And there are people who want to speak up that haven't felt able to, who will go on and say exactly what they think. And a lot of people will, even if they don't agree necessarily with the language, and you can attack people for language, which I tend not to do actually, because, as I say, it's people just trying to express themselves, but the sentiment and the feeling is there. And that's something that can't be ignored. So, it is a channel of free speech. It should remain so. Of course, if anybody says anything that's too extreme, we have a whole Ofcom situation, whether that's fit for purpose or not, another conversation for another time. I think it needs reform. But ultimately, there's a way in which you complain.
The country needs reform, Charlie.
Yeah.
I daren't say you would agree with that, but...
Well, I'd reform Ofcom. I think that's they've overstretched in a number of ways.
Yes,
but I think it's a platform to allow people to say what they want to say, and there could be someone that equally vehemently disagrees, and they too will have their right to disagree,
right.
And you can have a conversation about why that both people stand in the position that they do. So I think it's all fine. If you don't like it, change the channel.
Yeah, exactly. Elliot, so Paul, our very dedicated viewer, has messaged in saying, why did the lefties assume they are speaking for the masses when they are the minority? And I think I noticed this in a lot of conversations I have when, let's say I'm speaking to someone who doesn't know what my politics are. They'll say something like, oh God, isn't Trump a total Nazi, or back when the Tories were popular, say something like, oh, they're evil Tories. I'm just assuming that I have the same opinion as them without even asking. It seems like it's often a small group of people shouting the loudest, live in a bubble where they presume that everyone agrees with them. Do you think, Elliot, that there are a significant number of people in the country that want GB News shut down and genuinely think that it is wrong for them to have a voice and have a channel? Or do you think it's just a small group of crazy leftists fueling this online campaign who are just shouting the loudest?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a good proportion of people that would like to see it shut down. All the Labour voters, I'm sure, the 33%. Who are no longer 33% right now, I'd imagine. But I think there's a lot of people who would like to see it shut down. In terms of these actions that we're seeing with boycotting businesses and boycotting GB News and M&S, I don't think there's many people that would go to those lengths, because it is extreme. You're attacking people for the very reason that they're saying stop funding hate, they are hating. So I don't see many people agreeing with that, even maybe Liberal Democrat voters and Tory voters who are not particularly right wing. But yeah, I mean, look, you can choose to shop at any business, like Charlie said. There's businesses that I don't like, that I would never go to, but I'm not going to go online. I'm not going to go and spray their windows with paint. I'm not going to smash the glasses. You know, in Newcastle before Christmas, one of the banks, I think it was HSBC, got smashed up, and there was paint all over the windows, and there was a massive, big load of commotion in the street. And you never see people from Reform or the Tory party going to, woke businesses and doing that. It's always from one side that we see this stuff.
Yeah, and
that's
I mean,
the
Elliot,
whole hypocrisy of it.
Yeah, Elliot, if you watched let's say a slightly left-leaning TV show, and when it was on the commercial break, you saw an advert come up for M&S, would you then assume that M&S is left-wing and say that you never want to shop there again?
Well, of course not. It's just business. Like, advertising is just part of business, and GB News is a business, M&S is a business, and they're collaborating together in a deal to make more money, essentially, and that's just the way it works. That's the way every business works. They don't all sit there asking each CEO, or what's your political views? Each manager, what's your political views? Okay, I don't agree with you, so I'm not going to invest in this business. I'm not going to collaborate with you. That's just not how it works.
Exactly. I mean, when I'm watching GB News, when I see an advert come up for, say, boxed boilers before the weather, I don't go, boxed boilers, they must be really right wing. It doesn't really make me think anything about the company's politics. I just think they know they're advertising on a channel that's getting X number of views, and they're hoping to get X number of people buying their boilers as a consequence. Anyway, let's move on a little bit. So I wanted to talk about this new campaign The Spectator is doing. They've called it SPAF, the Spectator Project Against Frivolous Funding, which I think is brilliant. So this is essentially the UK version of Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency that Elon has set up, where they're going through government spending and just highlighting the ridiculous places that money is wasting. So obviously Labour are not going to set that up for themselves, but the Spectator are going to do the best job they can to hold the government to account. And already, just in one article put out by them on this, there are some just absolutely bonkers examples of where we're wasting money. It's very easy to think when you see Rachel Reeves looking like she is absolutely desperate to find any penny anywhere she can to fill the black hole. It gives the impression that we've really cut all of the fat anywhere we possibly can and we're desperate. But then you read this article and you think, oh my gosh, how much money are we wasting? And I won't go through all of this, but we'll just highlight a few bits. So let's look at the foreign aid budget here. And, there will be many people, you'll have some people who say no foreign aid, we do not need to make any other country's problems ours. But I think even if you are in favour of helping other countries to some extent, you will think that some of the spending that is happening is just ridiculous. So let's look at this. We've got 21.5 million quid being spent to transform Ethiopia's tax system. Like, what the heck? I mean, I can understand money being spent to help build schools or something so kids can get an education, but on transforming their tax system, that seems a little bit bonkers, and I can't see how that is a justifiable priority to the British taxpayer. And then we've got 26 million quid to build tax capacity in the developing world, so similar one there, and 23 million quid to improve the financial management in Rwanda. We've got all sorts here, and I wanted to also look at there's some ridiculous subscriptions also. So 136 grand on LinkedIn subscriptions at the cabinet office. You've got thousands spent on ChatGPT subscriptions. I mean, it's just absolutely bonkers, some of the stuff they are wasting. But let's look at what's happening with asylum seekers. So we saw a story about PlayStations, I think, last week. But there is more. So we've got local councils using grant cash on driving lessons and theory tests for refugees. And I'm thinking, hang on, when I went through doing driving lessons and tests and whatnot, I spent an arm and a leg on it. My parents said if you want to drive, you sort it out yourself, and it cost me a lot of money. Yet these guys are getting it for free. Why? I mean, that doesn't seem like a human right, the ability to have a driving licence. I mean, there are plenty of Londoners that don't have one. And then we see that Croydon Council spent £7,000 on DJ lessons. I mean, you cannot make this shit up. And then, of course, we've got game consoles, football stadium tours, and all sorts. Absolutely ridiculous, the kind of stuff that we're wasting money on. And, you know, the article goes on and gives far more examples of how much we're wasting on DEI. I mean, it is just absolutely bonkers. So, I mean, Charlie, do you think, as Rachel Reeves, as the coffers get squeezed even more and more, that she will actually conduct I think it was a war on waste that she said we were going to have? Do you think we'll finally get rid of this problem of the government wasting tons of our money on superfluous crap, or do you think this is a plague of the state that will never go away?
Sadly, I think it's more of the latter. And I think until you get someone in that's actually of a business mind and has actually run a business and can actually hold those senior civil servants to account to say, why on earth are we spending this? What is that for? Where is the value for money? Where's the return? Unless you've got someone that can actually do that. And it's supposed to be, I think, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury is someone that's supposed to look at all sort of public spending. Well, you know, they need to be someone in business, I think, now, because there'll be too many middle management, sort of mid-ranking senior civil servants that will always push back. So that's what I fear. I mean, a couple of sort of quick observations. I remember when the Department for International Development merged with the Foreign Office, because on the one hand, you had the Foreign Office, which is to try and sort of resolve conflict and sometimes have tough negotiations with countries. And at the same time, when you wanted to get those countries on board with something, you know, the Department for International Development was giving them money at the same time when you were trying to sort of hold them to account for something. So the left arm didn't know what the right arm was doing half the time. So the merge was there for that reason, and to try and, you know, if you're investing in, you know, I mean, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head, but that Ethiopian sort of tax system, well, if it's going to help with their economy, let's say, and if then at the end of the day there's sort of a return for the UK because we've lent money or we've assisted in a particular way and there's some business interest and we get sort of money back for UK taxpayers and you can have a long-standing alliance, then fine. But if it's just giving money away, I think that's obviously something that needs to be looked at. And it might be controversial, but, you know, things like when it comes to the asylum seekers, I think if you've been actually granted asylum, and if you've actually come from maybe, you know, if you are genuinely an asylum seeker and you've genuinely sort of, you know, had a cause to come into the UK and you've been accepted, I'm not confident that that's the case in what we're seeing at all in a number of people that cross that channel in the small boat crossings. And I fear that you'll see that the Labour government champion at some point to say, we've got through the backlog. Well, what they've done is basically just given asylum to everybody that's applied. I do see a situation where if you've really come to this country and you are fleeing your own homeland, it can be tough. And so if you want, we talk a lot about trying to integrate people as much as anything else. And I do think if there is a small token, so, you know, if it is a trip to a football stadium, because that's our nation's sport and it's the number one, you know, and if it helps you integrate a bit more into British life, then I don't have a problem with that. But but there should be somebody looking at the figures to say, well, hold on, if that football stadium or if that club's charging you thousands of pounds for a group of four, you know, you want to know who's charging it, who's running it. Actually, that's not value for money at all. So there's I can see some positives in some of these things, but not the value for money at all. It doesn't seem to me that's the case there, which is why you need someone of a business mind, I think, to come in and really shake this up.
Yeah, and I think we'll carry on with that point that you're making there about there not being enough business minds in the cabinet, because we've got this story about the business secretary Jonathan Reynolds lying on his CV. Just before we go on to that, I'm just scrolling through here. I mean, this is absolutely hilarious. We had Creative Scotland spent 110 grand for a hardcore sex show to be staged in a sex cave. I mean, what? How on earth are we wasting taxpayer cash on that? But let's, on that point about business. So even before we found out that Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, was lying on his CV, I still thought that even with his bumped up CV with lies, that he was not qualified for the job. So Jonathan Reynolds, he claimed that he spent some time as a solicitor, and then aside from that has spent most of his time in politics. But there's not even really anyone else in the cabinet, unless you count Timpson, who's not actually an MP, who's dealing with the prisons. These are pretty much, it's a group of people who pretty much has just lived off the public purse for the vast majority of their careers. There is not really any entrepreneurial experience whatsoever in that cabinet, and I feel like that really has shown in the budget. It seems to me that Rachel Reeves was somewhat surprised when her, what we told was going to be a budget for growth, ended up resulting in a millionaire leaving the country every 45 minutes, businesses up in arms saying they're going to have to cut their staff numbers and potentially close down. It seemed like she was surprised that this budget was not going to grow the economy. It seems like these people thought that you can tax your way to growth. It was very clear that there really aren't any business minds in the cabinet. But then we find out that not only did Rachel Reeves lie about her already limited experience on her CV, on her LinkedIn CV, but that Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, was at it as well. So he's now been told by the solicitor's watchdog that he needs to stop lying. And it was, Guido did a very good job of uncovering what was going on this. And it wasn't, you'll see here the edit to his LinkedIn, it wasn't just his LinkedIn where he lied, it was in many different places. So he claimed that he was a trainee solicitor and then an actual solicitor at the firm Adelshaw Goddard. That has now conveniently been edited and the solicitor part has disappeared. But it wasn't just on LinkedIn that he made this slip up. A lot of people said that people were too harsh on Rachel Reeves because it was, it's just a little mistake on LinkedIn. But he had it on his personal website. He had it in, there were multiple newspapers that had articles on him saying that he was a solicitor, and now you might say that's the journalist's fault, but he probably would have A, spoken to them for those articles, and B, would have had the ability to contact them to ask them to correct their mistake if they had got his previous job titles wrong, but he chose not to do so. And it's against the Solicitors Convention, whatever law, can't remember the exact name of it, to claim that you're a solicitor when you are not actually qualified and on the register for it. He said he made a spoken contribution in Parliament where he claimed that he was a solicitor. So this was just not, it wasn't just one little slip up. And I mean, Elliot, do you think that this makes you lose trust in this Labour government, seeing that another one of them is a liar, or do you think that this is just another silly old sleaze story that only really matters in the Westminster bubble and doesn't really affect normal voters?
I mean, it is just another story for them. I mean, every week there's a story, right? But this is quite a big one. I mean, lying on your CV for a job like that, especially. I mean, look, if we went to a job interview in any job, at any level, any pay level, and you lied and they found out about that, you'd be instantly dismissed, right?
Yep.
So why is he still there? And why did he even get the job? Why was it not verified in the first place as well, by the way? By, through his whole career in politics, up to being, the position he's in now, he's never been, pressed on it ever. I've kind of fail to believe that, if I'm honest. So that's why it's really shocking to me to see that, because I just don't understand how it's never come out before, and he's got this high by basically lying.
Yeah. I mean, Elliot has just said that he's basically, got to his position by lying, but some people might say, well, it was his record as a politician that's got him to this position. His experience as a trainee solicitor, which may have been exaggerated as a solicitor, has nothing to do with it. What would you say to that, Alex?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can be a good politician and never have had a career. I don't think. Actually, maybe I take that back. I don't think there are many at all good politicians that have not had real careers. The reality is that the reason why this is a problem, and it is the Legal Services Act of 2007 why this is a problem, because you're not allowed, it's a criminal offence to pretend to be a solicitor and sell your experiences if you're a solicitor. The problem is he's based a lot of his, commentary around his experience as a solicitor, so to speak. And like he said, he even said it in Parliament, which is misleading the House of Commons, which is also against the rules. Now, it's a bigger problem when you are trusted with the country's businesses, so to speak. You are the business secretary, after all. When you're trusted with managing such a important aspect of our country's, success, so to speak, and you've falsified elements of your background and used those false elements of your background in previous parts of Parliament to say, I've done this, therefore you should listen to me, you should take my advice. Well, people will go, no, why should I take the advice of you? You've clearly lied. You've clearly lied on your CV. Now, of course, Jonathan Reynolds is going to make the same excuses that what's her face has done. I can't remember her bloody name for a second. They're Rachel Reeves. Thank you. She's so forgettable. I mean, I think this whole government's, apart from it's all cock-ups, are so forgettable. This is the thing. People cannot trust politicians who have lied so blatantly. And, the worst thing about this is, had he not updated his LinkedIn, people probably wouldn't have known. And why the hell? How stupid are you? How dumb have you got to be at politics while this Rachel Reeves scandal is going on? And people like Guido are clearly watching LinkedIn pages of all the top politicians of the country. Why would you do it? How thick have you got to be? Does he think he's hiding behind the cover of Rachel Reeves and he won't get the scrutiny because she's in the doghouse for it at the moment? It is bonkers to me how thick and how stupid our politicians are in this country and how they think they're going to get away with lying. And then once they're caught lying, to persist with the lie, to persist with it and not just say, do you know what? We've all made mistakes in our lives. Nobody is perfect. To say, do you know what? I made some mistakes. I own up to it. I'm going to rectify those things. Judge me on my performance now. At least own up to your mistakes. People have respect for people who can say, I effed up. I need to do better. And nobody should follow that as an example of what to do. Here's the good things that I'm going to do. None of them do it. It loses massive amounts of trust in British politics, which is already probably at an abysmally low point. I just think this whole Labour government is full of trash. It's just trash. People who have never had real jobs, people who have never lived a day in their life, people who have never really had to struggle that much. And they've pounced off the system. They've pounced off the public purse. They don't give a toss. But they care about public opinion either, frankly. Well, clearly they don't, because they're approval ratings at 68%. Disapproval. Incredible. I'm lost for words, Chloe, because the whole thing's so baffling to me.
I know, it seems like the scandals just don't stop coming. I mean, it's making our lives easy to find stories, as I mean, there are just more of them than we can even get through.
Honestly, it feels like that. I think I said on Twitter the other day, I was like, it is like this government cannot go a week without a scandal. If it was a business, it would be bankrupted by the amount of refunds. If we could refund a government, this one would go through. I think the only two would go through with Liz Truss's government, and this one, they'd be through the roof with refunds. Unbelievable.
Exactly, and I think people are particularly furious because this is a party that, in the run-up to the general election, painted themselves as these sort of moral saints. They said politics is going to be different. We're the party of change. We are more like you, like normal working people. We're not these sleazy, unaccountable politicians that don't keep to our promises. Again, it's not just stuff like CVs, it's actual lying on their promises that's making people furious. And you mentioned there, Alex, this issue of a lack of humility in the party. So Charlie, let's move on to you. It says here in the Guido article, Number 10 is desperately spinning Jonathan Reynolds' CV embellishment as a mere admin error. So they're unwilling to put their hands up and say, look, guys, we messed up. And it's not just on these, little scandals that we're seeing a lack of humility. I think you're seeing it in policy as well. Because, for example, the farmers' tax, we understand why that was brought in. It's because there are many people who have taken advantage of a loophole where they have purchased land out in the countryside so that they can hand it down inheritance tax free, but they are not actually farmers, right? That's why they brought in the policy. It wasn't well thought through enough. They should have made that policy, they should have amended it to make sure that people who are actual working farmers aren't affected by this. But they haven't got the humility to put their hands up and just say, look, guys, we messed this up. We're going to amend the policy because we don't want to accidentally destroy our food security. Same on the winter fuel payments. It's not actually going to save the Treasury that much cash. I think it's estimated 1.5 billion and that may be even less after more of them sign up for pension credit who weren't already on it. They could have, this really damaged their reputation. They could have put their hands up and said, look, guys, we messed up. This was a bad idea. We're going to reverse this policy. But still to this day, they haven't. They claimed they weren't going to raise taxes on working people. They did, but rather than being honest and saying, look, guys, we got it wrong, we thought we weren't going to have to do this, but we've got a different situation than we thought we had before the general election, and we're going to have to raise some taxes. They've sort of weaved their way around the definition of a working person to try and make it look like they have kept to their promises. So, I mean, Charlie, do you think that the government should start apologising more and start being more humble, or do you think that will make things worse for them? Because they often say if you apologise, the herd just comes for you even harder. You give them an inch, they'll take a mile. What do you think the government's approach should be? Should they start apologising for their mess ups, or should they continue trying to hold their line and act as though they haven't done anything wrong?
Well, I try and keep an open mind and try and keep optimistic, but I think I can honestly say that anything that could have gone wrong in the first 6 months of government for this government has gone wrong, and it's a mess of their own making. I think it's probably now too late. Actually, there was an opportunity, a window of opportunity, I think, at the budget, funny enough, to say, look, we've said we're going to have to make some tough decisions. We've had to break some promises, but admitting that you're breaking promises by introducing national insurance contributions, having spent the last however many months telling the country we are not going to raise VAT, income tax or national insurance, and then it's there. First impressions absolutely count, and I think the first thing to take away the winter fuel allowance, you might need to act tough, but you don't need to act tough against the most vulnerable. So all of these things that they've decided to do, there's no strategy, there's no coherent plan. And it's the small things, as you say, so even from the CV scandal where they're blaming, as a former advisor, I'm going to stand up for advisors, they're blaming someone else for writing this and saying, it was an admin error of someone in my staff. Well, blame me. You're the politician. It's a public-facing document. How stupid can you be if you think, you would have had to sign that off? You wouldn't leave your CV with your, junior secretary just to put up online for the whole world to see. If you have, well, then that's an error. And if you haven't checked it, then you're incompetent. Problems there. Problems with the farmers' tax. As you say, the whole issue for me is that you've got the government saying this is only going to affect about 500 farms, and 500 of those people that you explained, Chloe, about where there has been a loophole and where people might not have paid tax that they should have. The NFU, the National Farming Union, is saying, no, hang about. This policy affects about 75,000 of us. So, that's such a huge gap between 500 and 75,000. So who is to blame? Who isn't doing their homework? Who is not coming to the table to try and address these problems? And if it is a government fault, then they should be able to say, look, everybody knows what our agenda is. We're trying to get as much money as we can because of those terrible Tories and they wreck the economy. So we have to make tough decisions. We might have got this one wrong. We're looking again at the winter fuel payment. But you can understand my frustrations. You can see what we're trying to do. We've got to trim the fat somewhere. And, for me, it goes back to, without going back to the previous story, but, where government departments ask for more money, they always ask for more money. The whole focus should be, we should be doing more with less. How can we grow our business? How can we grow our department's achievements with doing it with less money? Because it's taxpayers' money. And if you spend all that money, you then obviously ask for that same amount the year later. Because if you cut your budgets or if you underspend, then the Treasury will say, oh, you don't need that much money, so we won't give you as much next year. That's seen as a failure within Whitehall. That should be seen as an achievement to say, I've achieved so much, I'm saving the taxpayer money, we're becoming more efficient as a government, more efficient in terms of our public services, more successful as a country. But the mentality isn't there because you will always have, I'm afraid, with this Labour government, the unions breathing down the back of the neck of the government and the Treasury. To say, you can't cut here, you can't cut my members, and so I fear all the windows of opportunities to change all of these things, to apologise for things, has gone through, has passed, because it will just look as though the Prime Minister's sort of trying to look tough by hanging in there and doubling down, but I think he's lost the will of the people, that old phrase.
Alison says, if they apologise, we will just think they are grovelling kiss asses. Perfect Storm says, Keir Lennon and his immediate front bench are not fit for purpose. They are just puppets. So who are the puppeteers? Well, sounds like from what Charlie is saying, that the unions to a degree and whatnot are to some degree the puppeteers that are going to stop them from cutting down government waste. Anyway, let's move on a little bit let's talk about the reform polling. I know we've spoken about this quite a few times because we seem to keep having more and more polls coming out, but it is quite astonishing what they have pulled off. So we've had another YouGov poll, and I stress that is YouGov because there are a lot of smaller polls that have been coming out. Like we had a Find Out Now poll, put the Reform Party on 29%, and we don't always know how big and how trustworthy these other random polls are. But YouGov is one of our sort of most well-known pollster in Britain, and they've now put Reform in the lead not just once but twice, which kind of suggests it wasn't just a fluke poll the first time. If they've got another poll now and they've gone up again another point, so we've now got the Reform Party on 27%, Labour on 25%, and Kemi Badenoch and the Tories trailing behind in 21%. So it's starting to look like it might just be possible for the Reform Party, given they've got 4 years left until the general election, to continue on their upward trajectory. If they do, they could potentially, if they get over 30%, be able to start making pretty big waves in a first past the post system, and perhaps alone without the Tories. But there's a lot of talk about a Tory reform pact. Now, that talk seems to primarily be coming from the Tories as opposed to reform members or reform MPs themselves, because the Tories are sort of desperate to make a pact to survive, but the Reform Party don't seem that interested at the moment. We've had Liz Truss. She's been at the Art Conference. She's been speaking to Darren, which we'll have a look at in a moment, but we'll just have a look at this briefly. So Liz Truss is now saying true blue Tory MPs should join forces with Reform. She says that she wants the best of Conservatives and Nigel Farage's party to get together. Now, some people won't listen to Liz Truss because they think that she's bonkers and she was a nightmare and she only lasted for a few days, but she seems to be trying to iron out her reputation. She's put out a book and she's doing more media appearances trying to give advice about what she thinks should happen. Let's have a little look at what she had to say to Darren at the conference, at the art conference.
Way to go. And I think the key thing is that, you know, whoever gets into government in 2029 has to massively overhaul our country and overhaul the state, because we're in a disastrous situation. You know, people are being thrown in jail for Facebook posts, but we've got these appalling grooming gangs who have raped tens of thousands of girls. They've not all been brought to justice. It's been covered up. We've got a disastrous economy which is going down the drain, and it's not just Rachel Reeves is incompetent, which she is. It's also the Bank of England, the Office of Budget Responsibility, the Treasury. They're all responsible. So I think a MAGA movement in Britain has to be about completely changing the way our country is run. We've got to.
So there's a little bit of what Liz Truss had to say. That you may have heard a little ring there. Darren is on his way in to come and talk to us about what he's been up to at the art conference. So we've got Liz Truss there saying in the article that she thinks that there should be a pact with reform. And then here, another question to also ask is, will it be possible, if reform can get into power with or without the Tories, to actually sort out the mess that is the the system, as Liz Truss might call it. This is a woman who claims that she came into power with the right ideas, but the whole system just worked against her, and there was nothing that she could do. The Reform Party could well face the same troubles. You know, we've had people like Dominic Cummings talk about, you know, ripping up the civil service and starting again, but it's quite hard to do when you actually get there, to have such a big overhaul like that when you've got so many forces working against you. I mean, Alex, what do you think? Do you think that Reform should consider any pact with the Tories? And do you think that they will be able to do all the meaningful things they talk about if they were to actually get into number 10?
My fear with a pact with the Tories is that the Tory it's not so much some of the politicians, because I mean, I know many Tory politicians and some of them are absolutely fantastic. I would have them in the Reform Party in seconds. I can name them, but you don't need to. You already all know who they are. So I'm not actually against many of the politicians joining the party. It is the machinery behind the Conservative Party that deeply worries me, because that machinery failed not only the Conservative Party itself, but it failed over 14 years in government to make any effectual change. As if you've watched any of Dom Cummings' speeches post exiting Downing Street, whilst you may have particular views about Dominic Cummings, he does understand the mechanics of government extremely well, and he is right about a lot of things. And you do need. And one thing the Tories do understand is they understand government extremely well. They do understand the mechanics of what makes the civil service tick. And those are the places in the civil service we need to go after extremely fast. Day one of being in government, if reform take over, they need to start before anything else doing what Trump is doing, and you go through the civil service and you cleanse it, because the civil service has become a toxic environment where nothing gets done, you can't affect change, and anything that you do try to get changed takes months and years, and by the time you've done anything, you're out of office. So I think my concern is that the machinery would come with it, but if you stripped the Tory machinery away and you took some of those fantastic Tory leadership people, and I'm talking about the Suella Bravermans, the Robert Jenricks, those types of people, I think they would strengthen Reform's hand. And I think Jordan Peterson said something about this at our conference, and I think he might be right. I have a feeling there may have to be some deals done in the next election. If we're being realistic, and I really want Reform to win, but there are certain places where we will kill each other. Reform and the Tories will knock each other out and give Labour the seats. And if you told me, and you say, Alex, there is a choice between having the Tories and Reform in some form of agreement, pact, and it will completely obliterate most of the left, I would do it, because we cannot afford we can't afford 4 years of this government, let alone 8 or 10. And if that ever becomes a reality, I mean, I think I'll be out of here. So, and I think many British people, if they could have the choice to leave, would leave as well. 8 years of Labour, that's my adult life gone to neglectful, terrible governments. So that's the way I'd put it to people. But I think we're a long way off yet. And I think if reform's surge continues like this, I don't think they'll have anything to worry about from the Tories.
Yeah. Now, Darren's very patiently waiting in the green room to tell us what he's been up to at the ARC conference, but we'll just get a very quick word on this from Charlie and Elliot. Now, Charlie, are you hoping that your buddies in the Tory party will team up with Reform so that they've got a chance at next general election, or do you think that that would be a disaster for one or both of the parties?
Well, I agree with Alex. Anything to get this government out, I think, should be done. I think it's just as in 2019, it was a conversation between Boris and Nigel, and Boris, I think, said to Nigel, "Look, stand down some of your Brexit Party candidates because we don't want to split the vote." I think the momentum clearly is with Reform, and so it will be more of a conversation for Nigel to Kemi to say, "I think you need to sort of stand down your sort of candidates rather than mine." So he's certainly got the upper hand. I don't think the Tories could ever really look at themselves and could ever be forgiven if they were somehow the cause of a split vote, which lets Labour in for another 4 or 5 years. It would look much more worse for them than it would Reform, because, as I say, they've got the momentum. So I'm sure that conversation will be had, and I think I think that the trouble for Reform is, very quickly, is I think they are forming a coalition. They are forming that sort of Boris-y coalition in the Red Wall and in the South. And I think, okay, Liz is calling for all Tories to join Reform. I'm not entirely sure if Reform would want all Tories to join them, because there'll be lots of people, particularly maybe in the North in that Red Wall, that don't necessarily agree with Liz Truss or Suella Braverman. They are old Labour voters that are going to Reform because they just genuinely want change from the old has-beens. So Reform have got a really difficult problem, I think. They're doing incredibly well, but I think their only problem is, who do they actually now let into their party? Everybody wants to get in. And so they've got to be really picky and choosy.
Yes,
yeah.
Agreed.
Elliot, last word to you. Deal or no deal? What do you reckon?
No deal under any circumstances, especially in a first past the post. I just don't think a deal is needed. If we had a system, for example, like France with a 2-round voting system, I would say absolutely, because then we would actually be splitting the vote. When you're in a first past the post system, you are not splitting the vote whatever party you vote for, because you have a right to vote for somebody and there's no second round. With this opinion that that you're splitting a vote is essentially saying, like, you have to vote for Labour or you have to vote for the Tories. And that is an archaic way of thinking. I think it's almost anti-democratic, because, like, again, you're forcing people to vote for Labour or Tory and trying to make them guilty if you vote for Lib Dem or for Reform or for whatever other party you're voting for. I do think an advantage would be, like Alex was mentioning, the experience of certain politicians in the Tory party, which would be good. However, you've got to question the motives as well. Are they jumping over from a sinking ship? I think some of them definitely will be. So I think it's important that Reform actually vets them properly and verifies that they're there for the right reasons. But ultimately, I think no deal, basically.
Yeah, we often get a lot of comments coming in from our viewers saying that they'd be absolutely furious if particular Tories were to
I mean, I live in the Red Wall that up in the northeast, and there's if that happened up here, I think honestly Reform's vote would tank if that happened, because the Tories are basically non-existent anyway, apart from like the southern part of the region. But up in Sunderland, Newcastle, Durham, Northumberland, like there's just no one's interested in the Tories anymore. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's move on to Darren, who's waiting very patiently. Thank you to all three of you for joining us this evening. Your contributions have been absolutely fabulous. Great to have Charlie on for the second time. And Elliot, what's this, your second, third time on the podcast?
Third, I think, yeah.
Third time. You'll be a veteran soon, like Alex and I. Anyway, thank you all for joining. We'll switch to Darren now, and you guys can get off for a nice early night. And Alex, will the viewers be able to catch you on breakfast tomorrow morning?
They will indeed. I'll be up at 4 a.m, so please all join me. Not at 4, but 6:30, 6:35 if you're up, and 7:35, 8:35 I'll be on air. Come and say hello.
There you go. He's not on GB News often, so you got to catch up on us. All right. Thank you very much, folks.
Hi.
Hello, Darren.
Well, Alex is absolutely heartbroken to not be the star of that show, I could tell.
Shut up, Darren.
I don't know if the viewers can hear Darren.
I'm staying for this just for legal reasons. I'm staying on the stream for legal reasons.
I'm not sure the viewers can hear Alex, but if you can't hear him, he's currently interrupting Darren. But Darren, you're at the art conference. We've just been having I don't know if you saw, we've just been having a little look at some of your conversations you've been having there. You spoke to Zia Yusuf, who was talking about the awful situation with the prison. So he put up this tweet. He said, "If you feel unsafe in Britain, here's why. During their 14 years in power, the Tories exploded the population by 6.5 million. But how many new prison places have been added? Only 455. So let's just have a look at that little clip, and then you can tell us what you've been up to.
Yeah.
Give ourselves a chance to build the infrastructure that we need. The Tories, over 14 years, they grew the population. They exploded it by 6.5 million new people through migration. Do you know how many new prison places they built?
Well,
900. Yeah. 900. And they left the country with fewer hospital beds than where they started. So we need to build more homes, we need to build more hospital beds, we need more prison spaces, we need to build infrastructure. We also need to protect the culture of this country, Darren, which has been, frankly, fed to the wolves by the appalling open borders policy that has been promoted by successive Tory governments, of which Kemi was a part. So all of the things she's talking about are incremental tinkering at the edges. What this country needs is a reboot. And you talk about reasons to be optimistic. I'm a pretty optimistic person. Anyone who comes to our events will see how optimistic they are. And there is no more optimistic person that I've ever met than Nigel. Give ourselves a...
So there we go. That's a little snippet of you talking to Zia. Looks like you spoke to lots of different people. You spoke to Liz Truss, which we had a look at. What have your highlights been from the conference?
Listen, I think actually my highlights have been around the whole dichotomy really between the Conservative Party and Reform has been one of the Reform are leading the charge and the Conservatives are very much left behind. And I didn't get to speak to Kemi. I didn't get to speak to a whole host of Conservative-minded politicians. And by that, I mean the Conservative Party. And why is that? Why are they hiding away? That's what I want to know.
So is that because there are not many Tory MPs at the conference, or they just didn't want to speak to you, or you didn't get to
Well, there aren't that many there. I'm joined by a Willie, by the way. I'm joined by a Willie.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. How are you?
The most famous Willie on GB News.
Exactly. See,
I'm not getting paid for this appearance. This is purely a cameo at the behest of Darren. But what I would,
give us your thoughts, Will.
I'll give Darren a hand after the longest 40-minute taxi ride of my life alongside Darren.
Poor you.
It's not that there weren't a lot of Conservative MPs. What I think that ARC demonstrated is that there is still a massive divide between this emerging and surgent reform movement and a Conservative establishment.
Yeah.
So the first person that was put on in the keynote speech on day one was Kemi Badenoch. And I spoke to John Anderson, former Deputy Prime Minister of Australia today, who's on the board of ARC. And between us and I guess the thousands of people listening, he said, I was a bit concerned about that because it would sound like we're trying to push someone who is, to be honest, leading a dysfunctional Conservative party.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people there, to be honest, who are still pushing the old, wet, Liberal Democrat version of the Conservative movement. I think the reason why you saw Reform kind of have an impact, but not really, is that the people who turn up to ARC, not all of them, but a lot of them, still are that sort of liberal Democrat version of the Conservatives. And that, even as we look at the polls, which say that reform are surging ahead, and in these sorts of conversations where we all love reform, there's a huge establishment of soft right conservatives that you're going to need to try and batter down. That's not going to be easy.
Well, hang on, Chloe. What I would add to that is that actually, on the first day of ARC, Kemi Badenoch was given the keynote speech, right, at the start.
Would you say you're adding to that or just repeating what I've said?
No, Nigel Farage was given the second day, right, of speeches. Shut up. And
Yeah, we haven't seen
Nigel
that many
Farage was
clips on
given the
him. I've
keynote of
just seen a
speeches.
short clip of him talking about net zero, sat down with Jordan Peterson. But he
Well,
doesn't seem to
exactly,
have
yeah.
been put as the
So you
star of the
haven't
show.
seen the full thing. He didn't get to give the whole shebang that Kemi Badenoch did on the first day. And I think that was potentially deliberate, and I wondered if that was fair. And I was concerned about it, I won't lie. So she didn't choose to speak to us. She didn't choose to speak to those who may well be sympathetic, lend a sympathetic ear. So, yeah, I'm concerned about it. I haven't changed my mind, to be brutally honest. And this is the first time I've said this. An exclusive for Reason. I am concerned, and I haven't changed my mind on the fact that this country needs fundamental change, and I don't know if it's going to get it from the current crop of conservative politicians.
Do you think that... So we had Jordan Peterson, I don't know if you saw, there was a clip of him being interviewed. He said that he thinks that the right needs to unite in this country, and that Kemi Badenoch
He said
and
that to
Farage
Nigel.
Yeah, he said that Farage and Badenoch are both impressive and they should come together. I mean, do you think he just doesn't get it because he's not in the UK and doesn't understand our politics enough?
They were probably the only coherent sentences that he put together in the 10 minutes of garble that we listened to.
Oh, really?
The 12 principles for life, Jordan Peterson, was really good, and he came at the right time. Succinct, smart, common sense points. We were talking tonight with several people who were listening to Jordan going, we really liked that version of you, but the kind of bloke who's wearing the weird jackets and talking about weird esoteric stuff and speaking for 10 minutes before he lets Nigel Farage into a conversation, that's a bit of a difficult bloke to get your head around. So I think the bottom line is I'm not sure I would take everything that Peterson said at this conference entirely seriously.
Yeah, as indicative of the country. It was really weird because he said at the start of the interview, he went on for 10 minutes and then Nigel said, well, good morning. And the reason he said that is because he hadn't got a word in for 10 minutes. And then that was his first introduction to the audience, was to say good morning. It was an odd introduction.
And the audience all laughed at that. They all got it.
I thought it was deliberate, and I thought it was deliberate in the sense of they wanted to silence Nigel and not let him get a word in edgeways because they hope Kemi is the next Boudicca, and I don't think she is. I'm sorry, I don't anymore.
Whereas I disagree with that. I just think Jordan Peterson now has the emotional intelligence of a teaspoon, and he just wasn't quite aware that he was talking over what a lot of people came to see. But there could be a conspiracy there. Who knows?
Well, I'm not that harsh. As you know me, I'm not a bitch. I can hear Alex Armstrong on the line.
I told you I was staying for legal
can
reasons.
hear him, but Alex Armstrong is tuning in.
Oh,
in
I
the
think the
background.
let's ask the guest because I said I'm on the broadcast.
Can the audience please let us know if they can hear Alex Armstrong in the background?
So this part of the podcast is me.
Actually, hang on.
Me
You know what I can
Karen,
do
analyzing
is because
Will analyzing
hang
Jordan.
on, because Elliot's left, but Charlie and Alex are still here. So we can do this.
Nobody wanted to see them. Nobody wanted to see them too.
It's not enough. It's not enough that Alex Armstrong goes after Darren Grimes' gig on GB News. He's now going after Darren Grimes' gig on Reason. Unbelievable.
You know, speaking of which, because Alex doesn't get enough airtime, Alex, you can ask Darren. You can take over hosting. You can now ask Darren and Will a question about their experience.
The bloke hates the camera, doesn't he?
Let me ask you, Will. I mean, you know, of all the people you met, who would you say was the most impressive speaker of the night?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I interviewed Tony Abbott today. Tony Abbott, the 28th Prime Minister of Australia, and the one conversation that I thought was really important was to say, well, Tony, you actually coined the term "stop the boats." We had a similar problem in Australia 10 years ago around illegal immigration, and with a bit of political will, you managed to solve it. How'd you do it? And he said, Will, you've got to have a harsh deterrent. So he said the obvious things. He said, get rid of the hotels. He said offshore processing. But the thing which was really fun, and this will come out in a soon-to-be-released interview, is he said, look, if there is a boat in English sovereign territory, you put those people in a mothership, in an English naval vessel, and in the middle of the night, you take them into French waters and you drop them on the beach in France. And I went, what? Tony, in fairness, isn't that invading France? And he went, the English have invaded France for 1,000 years.
yeah. Bring back.
Keep in mind, everyone, this is a former Prime Minister of Australia. I went, well, Tony, don't you think that would lead to repercussions? And then he said,
I was going to say, I think he's available now. We surely need some tough leadership. Can he just come and do the job of Prime Minister over here, perhaps?
But the one thing he did say is, look, if you were to just drop them on the beaches of France, what would happen? And I said, well, I was thinking that there's going to be no military implications. Sanctions, economic stuff, probably not. I don't know. Who cares? We can live with our cheese for a bit. But he basically said, you just need to, for a short period of time, do the difficult things that are necessary. And it was so refreshing to hear that, because you're not hearing that from many British politicians right now.
True.
Well, guys, I hope you have a lovely time in whatever hotel you're staying in.
Hang on a minute, where's my bloody question?
Charlie, you can ask a question.
Oh, Charlie's here. I didn't
Bring
see
Charlie back
there.
in.
Have you had a good time?
I have, actually. I have.
Charlie's like your mum. Charlie's like your mother.
Listen,
How many drinks have you had, Darren?
You get to change your pants, Darren.
It's made me feel better. It's made me feel better about the state of the country, because I feel very depressed about everything, right? And hearing from people who say that Britain is still a phenomenal country to have ever existed, it's given the world so very much. And in order for it to get back to rude health, hearing from people like Douglas Murray, who just says, we just need to tell these people who tell us that what we have is nothing and worth nothing and has never amounted to anything, to fuck off. And I think that is a marvellous way to put it. And I only wish that for the last, 10 years of my life, that I had the courage to just say, yes, fuck off. You do not actually have the right ideas for this great country of ours, and you want to release the entire Western world into an absolute deluge of a completely inadulterated horror show.
Now to Chloe's more important question. How many drinks have you had tonight, Darren?
Yeah.
You
I
can't
haven't.
remember.
I don't drink.
He doesn't drink.
Right.
I'm serious. I don't drink.
Yeah. And I saw Jesus Christ today.
Yes.
He's resurrected for the third time.
Well, I bet you did. I bet he gave you that cheap microphone.
Was Jesus Christ in the cheap microphone business?
Yeah.
Well, he is today.
And on that,
I bet he gave
bombshell-
Charlie that beard.
All I can say is I've only followed you both from the prism of X, and you've both had a very busy week, and you've done very well. So well done to you both. You've got some
Oh,
cracking
that's
interviews
very
done.
kind, my hairy friend.
Right, let's bring things to a close, because
Good idea,
Alex
Chloe.
is on breakfast tomorrow.
Oh, yes. Alex has got to go. He's got to get 2 minutes of airtime.
Yeah.
It's very sad. It's very sad.
Right. Thank you, everybody,
You know what?
for joining
Good
tonight. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Charlie.
Good
Thank you,
night.
Darren. And
It'll be
thank
more
you,
polished next week.
Willie.
No, it won't.
Bye.
The Willies.